And Jesus tells us today that he has come from the Father and that he is returning to the Father. And he speaks clearly to the disciples, and they rejoice in that. They rejoice in that they understand where Jesus came from and where he is returning. But Jesus goes on to tell them, he tells them that in him, in Jesus, they have peace and they will have peace. But in the world there will be trouble. And this is something important for us to reflect on. When our heart is based in Jesus, when it is anchored in Jesus, we feel peace and confidence and surety and love. But if our heart is based in the world, if it is anchored in the world, then we find trouble and agitation and worries and difficulties. So we always must come back to Jesus and find in him the source of our peace and tranquility and serenity, and find it in the love that he has for us and the love that we want to share with him. But if we're drawn into the world, into the cares of the world, into the troubles of the world, then we are troubled as well. And Jesus, of course, was talking here about the first disciples who would be persecuted and who would be attacked and who would have all kinds of difficulties. And we must remind ourselves, how do we handle these difficulties? How do we handle the problems that arise in our lives? Well, I think we must first always not over-imagine the problem that we're facing, not make a worry about the consequences of the problem, but focus on the immediate problem itself, and then do what we can in our own power to respond to this problem, even in a very limited measure, because God will help us when we respond in the measure that we can to the problem, and when we take the small steps we can to respond to the problem and do something about that. But we must leave the rest to God. We must leave the rest in God's hand and only do what we can do at the present moment. As the old adage says, take it one step at a time. Just take it one step at a time and don't worry about the whole problem, but only do what we can do here and now in the immediate moment. And that also helps us not to carry the burden of the entire problem or to imagine many difficulties that may be consequences of the problem. But we only take it on in the measure that we can, in the moment that we can, and we respond in the way that we can here and now. And we leave the rest to God. And you see how that helps us not to be overwhelmed by our difficulties or worries or cares, but we always draw ourselves back to Jesus, and we always ask for Jesus' guidance and support and wisdom in how to handle the difficulties we are facing. And we come back to Jesus, and from that place of serenity and peace, we find the best way to respond to the difficulties that we face in this life. So let us always remember that in Jesus we have peace and serenity and tranquility, and he is there to support and help and guide us, and not let ourselves be overwhelmed by difficulties that may arise in the world, and not to give them more power than they're due or more importance than they're due, but only take on the measure that we can in the immediate moment and do what we can. And in that spirit of confidence and faith, we leave the rest to God and let him take over from there. So let our hearts be peaceful and at home in Jesus, and knowing that he is there for us, and we can have confidence in him, and we can walk with him each day of our lives as we too return to the Father.